This is mullein, and it is my favorite medicinal herb to grow in the garden, and arguably also the most controversial one I grow. And every time I share about it, I get a multitude of questions. So today I'm answering all of them, ranging from how I use it, how I grow it, is it actually invasive, common mistypes, and so much more. But first, let's cover the basics of growing it. Mullein is a flowering biennial or short-lived perennial, which means in the first year of its life, it produces a beautiful rosette of leaves much like this, and in the second year of its life, it shoots up a 6-foot tall stalk and produces these beautiful yellow flowers. The seeds are both plentiful and tiny, and you can start them in seed cells, which is what I do with these, or you can just direct sow them in the ground, and they are very accepting of pretty much any type of soil. That said, they certainly have a preference for growing in disturbed soil, along roadsides, in industrial areas, and in places you really wouldn't expect anything to grow. There are many plants that are like it, so let's dive into our first point. Point number one, is it the same as lamb's ear, gortolobo, aka Mexican mullein, or turkey mullein? No, it's most commonly mistaken for lamb's ear, and until they develop flowers, they look almost identical. The botanical name for mullein is Verbascum thapsus, whereas lamb's ear is Stachys byzantina. And while there are over 450 different species of mullein out there, we're usually referring to common mullein when we talk about mullein. Again, Verbascum thapsus, which is what we have right here. Lamb's ear, Stachys byzantina, is another great and wonderful medicinal plant, but it is entirely unrelated. They're much easier to differentiate when they bloom, as mullein produces these beautiful yellow flowers and lamb's ear produces these kind of purpley blue flowers. Another easy way to differentiate the two is that mullein tends to grow as a standalone plant, whereas lamb's ear likes to grow in clusters and groups. Gortolobo is also called mullein in parts of Mexico, and while it is occasionally Verbascum thapsus that is being referred to, true Gortolobo is this, which I'm not even going to try and pronounce, but it's also referred to as sweet everlasting and rabbit tobacco or Mexican mullein. One easy way to differentiate common mullein from Gortolobo is by crushing the leaves. Gortolobo has a delightful sweet smell, hence sweet everlasting, and mullein is earthy if you want to call it something nice. It also tends to cluster like lamb's ear. Great plant, but not the same thing as common mullein. A less common mistype is turkey mullein, which is native here to Southern California where I'm at. Its scientific or botanical name is Croton sediger, and while it is as soft as common mullein, it never shoots up a bloom, gets tall, and tends to stay clustered like lamb's ear. Point number two, is it invasive? Yes, but nuance is incredibly important, particularly when talking about invasive plants. Plants like kudzu, Japanese knotweed, and even plants in the mint family can destroy ecosystems. Even in my garden, I have some invasive species that are a pain in my butt, like Bermuda buttercup, aka oxalis. What makes a lot of these next level invasive species super difficult is that they're not just able to be stopped by cutting it off at the root, it's what's going on underneath the soil that's difficult. You either have to dig out a tuber, dig out all the roots, or reach for a super heavy duty herbicide, which I never do in my garden. Mullein is originally native to Europe, North Africa, and parts of Asia. But here in the US, it can be found in pretty much every state. I say nuance is important because mullein doesn't spread and multiply by its roots. It's considered invasive because one plant, when allowed to go to seed, can produce well above 100,000 seeds, and all of those seeds can remain viable for over 100 years. So if you do choose to grow it, as I'm doing here, you have to be incredibly mindful and cautious, particularly in the second year of its life, because if you let it go to seed and those seeds spread, it will outlast you, your kids, and likely even your grandkids. The good news, in contrast, is that since it doesn't spread by its roots, you can either just tear it out in the wild or chop it down at the soil level in your garden once it starts to flower or potentially go to seed. It has a very deep taproot and doesn't like to be fiddled with, much like carrots, so even if you yank it out, nothing is coming back. Point number three, can it be used as toilet paper? Yes. It is soft, non-irritating, and makes a great substitute for toilet paper in the wild, but I will not be demonstrating it nor ever using it for that purpose. Point number four, can it be used for fishing? Technically yes, but legally no. When mullein seeds are crushed up and thrown into water, it paralyzes the fish in that body of water and they'll float up to the top, which lets you just pick them out of the water. And while this was done by European settlers in the Blue Ridge Mountains, it is illegal today and you should not do it. So point number five, say you've heard about its benefits, but how do you utilize it? It's most commonly taken as a tea, tincture, or poultice, but I use it most as a tea and tincture. The process of making a tincture is pretty simple. Harvest the leaves, chop them as fine as you'd like, stuff a clean jar full of them, and then add either a high-proof spicy grain juice, I use 190 proof, or a food-grade glycerin. Leave it for 6 to 8 weeks in a dark place and try to shake it once a day. Once it's done, strain out the plant material and place the tincture into little dropper bottles. Dosing is subjective, but with tinctures, I'll add anywhere from 10 drops drops to a full dropper into a glass of water a few times a day, but that's not official advice. It's great for any respiratory ailments, which is why I was drawn to growing it and using it as someone who has dealt with all sorts of sinus and respiratory issues over the years. Some utilize it for asthma, and those who have quit smoking have found a lot of great use for it. Everyone I've given it to over the last cold and flu season has gotten a great benefit out of it, whether they've been in the beginning stages of a cold or in the midst of it. To use it as a tea, you can either put it into a dehydrator or just leave the leaves out on the counter and they'll dehydrate themselves. From there, you can crush up the leaves and add about a tablespoon or two to boiling water and then let it steep for 10 to 15 minutes covered. You can also use it as a poultice, smoke it, put it in vinegar, put it in oil, and I've even heard of people taking the leaves and putting them in their shoes to help alleviate the pain of plantar fasciitis, but I have not tried that. Now, point number 6, when is the best time to harvest it? As I mentioned earlier, it's a biennial plant, which means it generally has a life cycle of 2 years. In the first year, particularly if you start in the spring and then harvest it in the fall, you can just pull back the leaves and use them for any of the uses that I mentioned prior. If you do want to harvest the flowers, save the seeds, or even use the roots, you need to wait until the second year, which is when that beautiful 6-foot tall stalk will shoot up. These plants are maybe about a year old and they haven't done that yet, and the other mullein plant that I have growing in my container likely never will because there's not enough space for the taproot to really shoot down and lay the foundation right for it to go up. It's not something you really need to stress or worry about, and as soon as you see the plant looking healthy and these rosettes have developed, you can pull back the outer leaves and use them whenever you need them. And the same is true for the flowers. Once they show up, pluck them off and use them how you want. And point number 7, can you save the seeds? Yes, but I would be incredibly cautious and maybe not even let it get that far. If you do want to save the seeds, watch for the plant to start drying out a little bit and then chop it off at the soil level and put it somewhere far away from soil so you can separate the seeds. No matter how beneficial the plant is from a medicinal standpoint, it is just not worth it to let it spread to your garden and your local ecosystem. So get it away from soil and do your work there, or just buy the seeds. I got my seeds from the Plant Good Seed Company and it was about $5 for 250 seeds, which is well more than I will ever need. So my opinion is to buy the seeds, don't save the seeds, but if you do want to save the seeds, do it almost in a laboratory setting. Overall, it is one of my favorite plants in the garden as it's not particular, very easy to grow, and I can stick it in places where I wouldn't be able to grow anything anyways. A bit of a brief personal testimony is that pretty much every December and January, I would come down with either a couple colds or the flu, but this year, since getting my own homemade mullein tincture into my rotation, I've not gotten sick at all. It is a wonderful plant, and anyone with respiratory issues or a tendency towards getting the cold or the flu in the winter and cold season, I think it's well worth growing. I hope that this video has been helpful for you and that you learned some wonderful things about this great but controversial plant. As always, it's a huge help if you like this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more things like this, and leave a comment down below on what you think about mullein. Is it something you've grown? Is it something you've foraged? Or is it something you've never heard about before today? This has been Aaron, aka Garden Zaddy, and I'll see you on the next one.